when we get to that point, I wanted to make you aware of that.
Excuse me, quick question from the audience. I'm sorry to interrupt here, but I can't hear you out here.
Sir, we're having a meeting.
I didn't know the meeting started.
We're starting.
Okay, we can't hear anything. I'm up front, I can't really hear anything. I'd like to get it,
So
get good audio too.
we're having a meeting, so I would ask that you not interrupt and just listen, and I'll try to talk to you.
Speak up if you need.
So I'm not gonna ask you again, please don't interrupt. We're trying to have a meeting.
Just speak up, please.
I'm not gonna ask you again. Please do not, okay, will you please leave? I would appreciate it if you leave. If you're gonna keep interrupting, I'm gonna ask you to leave. So you're gonna interrupt again, or do I have to tell you again?
I can't hear what you're saying, is all I said. So if you could speak
I'm
up.
asking you to not participate.
I'm not participating.
Yes, you are. You're talking out loud to the group, and we're trying to conduct
I'm
a
asking you
meeting.
specifically if the group could just speak up, that's all I'm saying.
We are.
Okay.
So please do not participate again, or I will ask you to leave.
Okay.
So, what's in main school management?
Well, we really can't hear. Who's the chair?
Policy IJJ. We have 2 samples. Adoption. I've done a we have elected to go with, and in the past, board delegation. Ma'am, do you mind just putting it on the floor? I can put it on the floor if you'd like me to. It's very nice there.
I'm good.
You had a hard time hearing me? Yeah.
So, we have gone, or I should say,
Fast point of order question.
there's no point of order.
Did you guys go over DEDH?
So, you can ignore him.
Who's the chair?
We are going to meet on the
Kristen, are you the chair of this meeting?
All right, so this meeting's over. I hope you all have a good afternoon.
So just so you guys can talk about DEDH on the agenda.
All right, so put agendas in front of you also. We have 2 policies to review, and I attached a 3rd policy, ALGAR. I don't think it would be appropriate to discuss that one, but I wanted it in your hands for review. I think when we start talking with the sheriff and really start talking about what their duties and responsibilities of an SRO officer would potentially be, I think that would we want to wait before putting that in policy to make sure to share that with him and say, what do you have for feedback and recommendations? But I think from a KLGA standpoint, talking about relations with the school officers specifically and our relationship with them, I think it's appropriate to move forward with that. So I did attach TAR, but I don't think we should discuss it until we have the opportunity as an administrative team to talk with the candidate, to talk with the sheriff, and talk about what that responsibility would look like with the administration. So it's there for your information. Just when we get to that point, I wanted to make you aware of that.
Excuse me, quick question from the audience. I'm sorry to interrupt here, but I can't hear you out here.
Sir, we're having a meeting.
I didn't know the meeting started.
We're starting.
Okay, we can't hear anything. I'm up front, I can't really hear anything. I'd like to get it,
So
get good audio too.
we're having a meeting, so I would ask that you not interrupt and just listen, and I'll try to talk to you.
Speak up if you need.
So I'm not going to ask you again. Please don't interrupt. We're trying to have a meeting.
Just speak up, please.
I'm not going to ask you again. Please do not. Okay, will you please leave? I would appreciate it if you leave. If you're going to keep interrupting, I'm going to ask you to leave. So you're gonna interrupt again, or do I have to tell you again?
I can't hear what you're saying, is all I said. So if you could speak
I'm
up.
asking you to not participate.
I'm not participating.
Yes, you are. You're talking out loud to the group, and we're trying to
I'm
conduct.
asking you specifically if the group could just speak up, that's all I'm saying.
We are.
Okay.
So please do not participate again, or I will ask you to leave.
Okay.
So, policy IJJ, instructional library material selection. Sent you 2 samples, one from Drummond and Woodson, one from Main School Management.
Well, we really can't hear you. Who's the chair?
Policy IJJ. We have 2 samples. We have one from Drummond and Woodson, and we have one from Main School Management. We currently, it looks like from the 2019 adoption, it looks like we follow very closely to the Main School Management adoption. I've done a pretty extensive review. They seem very similar to me, but I personally feel like the Main School Management is the stronger policy, and it's the one we currently work off of. So, I feel like that's the policy that we should review and see if ours, we can make sure that ours aligns, because it's the one we currently have. Any thoughts on that?
Do you know what's been changed or updated on this?
On Main
From
School?
2019.
Essentially nothing. So for example, if you look at Main School Management, one of the things that you have in your sample policy, and it is the same with the Drummond and Woodson option. The board has been and has decided or selected to go with one of the 2 options. So when you look, for example, at option 1 and option 2, we just look at Main School Management, option 1, board delegation, option 2, board approval. We have elected to go with, and in the past, board delegation. Ma'am, do you mind just putting it on the floor? I can put it on the floor if you'd like me to. This is very nice there.
You had a hard time hearing? Yeah.
So we have gone, or I should say we, it was in 2019, so the board elected to go with the option 1 board delegation. And so I think the primary consideration moving forward would be to look at whether or not we want to go to board approval or continue with board delegation in respect to selecting curriculum and books. And obviously the board approves all curriculum. Then when you start talking about textbooks and purchasing of library books, our school committee has again elected to go with the delegation of that versus me bringing those items forward for a school board.
Yeah, I think that we should keep it with delegation, personally. I mean, yes, ultimate approval, but I think that relying on the people that are the curriculum coordinator and or building admin and teachers is the way to go ultimately. We want to put it back on them to make recommendations.
Obviously, the board, with the changing in the phonics program, the board is going to approve and have the opportunity to approve any proposed curriculum changes. The board approves new courses that are offered at the high school. But I think when you start talking about texts and buying supplemental material for the coursework, I don't really feel like, I think the delegation is a really wise decision because you have a lot of vetting that goes on through the buying process. Brian, do you want to speak to any of the buying process, whether it's department chair to then,
Well, at least at the high school level, it starts off with the individual teacher that then goes through the department chair. The department chair then contacts the curriculum coordinator, depending on what the resource is.
Yeah.
It's vetted through the curriculum coordinator. The curriculum coordinator gives us the yay or nay, comes back, then comes to the principal, vetted again, then goes to the superintendent, and then obviously ultimately to the board. So we've had that process in place the last at least 2 decades, maybe longer than that. But that way it's still being looked at. I mean, it's essentially being vetted 30 times before it hits your desk, and before it hits the board.
I could kind of speak to a little bit about what happens at the curriculum coordinator level.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
So at the curriculum coordinator level, I'm involved with the Department of Ed. I meet weekly with them, and MCTM, which is a regional committee where we all meet together. It's all the curriculum coordinators. It has other administrators on it from the whole region, and we have a networking team where we vet our curriculum through that as well. So if I have something that I'm not familiar with, I don't just go on what I know. I will then research and vet that through our regional supports. So it's a much larger system, so that we know that everything that we're using is research-based, is how it's used across other schools. And the teachers, when they propose it to me, they are not just giving me a title, they are providing me with what course they're going to use it with, how they're going to use it, what standards it meets, and I actually connect that and make sure that is all relevant to their course.
And I think one of the things that's critical with this policy, and you're going to see it in my September report, specifically to the 2-school board, I've already talked to the principals about this, is just making sure that we have a curriculum that is aligned to the main learning results, and we're showing that it is, and then we start to reevaluate where we are after 2020 and 2021, where we slowed down through moving through a lot of that information. Obviously the 1 year missing half the year, or excuse me, a third of the year, the second year at a couple of days a week. And so what I've done is asked the principals to talk to their departments about updating their syllabi and matrices, and making sure that our syllabi are aligned to our matrices, and really just doing an audit of that curriculum. Are we covering it? We were in 18-19, we were starting to in 19-20, and then making sure that we are, if there's any adjustments that need to be made from a summary standpoint. 7th grade geography is going to cover China instead of India, making sure that those things get updated, and then putting that online for parents to see, so that if they have more specific questions, they can then direct those to the teachers as the audit's taking place. And so just kind of working through that process where the curriculum gets updated and then ultimately made visible. We would like to get to that point. So that's one of the things I think is critical about this, is the board expects the superintendent to report on progress made in aligning instructional materials with curriculum development. And so I think that the board delegation, again, really allows that to happen. And it's going to be how I structure one of my goals as we move forward. So recommendation would obviously be to stick with option 1. Is that fair to summarize?
Well, I think also we need to change the word board to committee. And then, Jenny, I didn't know if you had any, just looking at the one that we have right now, that hasn't been amended since 2019. 19, if there's anything that you just shared in the criteria for selection that you would want to add.
So with the assistance, that would align with option 1, board delegation. Those 2 paragraphs would line up. Obviously, we have to change anywhere it says board. It should say committee. So
Yeah.
I can make a note of that. And then if you transition, each school shall maintain a library media program. If you look at those paragraphs, those are identical, main school management paragraph to our current policy. And obviously, when you transition down to that paragraph, you look at delegation of responsibility for materials, technology, internet resources to the school staff, professionally trained staff, subject to the criteria and procedures for selection, and the board's policy on challenge materials described below. That's something that we obviously have in place, and so parents or community members want to challenge material, that will be a stride as we move through this policy. Obviously, we have 2 repetitive paragraphs, so we've got to take that out because it repeats itself again. Strike that. We then have our definitions of instructional materials and library media sources. So that aligns. We have our objectives of selection. And that aligns to the main school management sample policy. Any questions about those 2 comments? And we have our criteria for selection.
Under that
Yeah.
objective, would we change the learning results to be Common Core, or what are we using for wording?
Oh, still are using the
Okay.
learning results.
I wasn't sure.
We could add the next gen science standards. They have that in there. So,
The main learning results are aligned to Common Core, so
Okay.
they're kind of
I
interchangeable.
just didn't know if we were mentioning both or just.
should it explicitly next gen science standards? be
Well,
added?
if you do, we must have a different policy. When the board accepted main learning results, right?
Yeah.
We must have a policy. I think you'd have to amend that policy first or then amend if you were to add it to this policy. Right, because the board had to accept those. I don't remember when that was a while back.
Oh, you're saying if we actually added?
I don't think you can add it here. I think you have to add it first. The board has to accept it.
Yeah.
Then you could add it here.
Yeah. So learning results, main learning.
Yeah, we have I know those were accepted, so those have to be, and then we could add it.
Amended.
And then correct, if they amended that policy, then we can just add it here.
Yeah.
What's that?
But they're already in here.
Meaning if we were to
No,
add
no.
other wording.
I understand they're already in, I'm saying the board had to approve those.
Right.
But to add it here, I think we have to accept those, and then you could amend them here.
To add
Next
next gen. thing
Right.
that he was talking
Oh,
about.
to add next
Yeah.
gen.
Yes.
And I mean, I feel like that it's not I don't think it's a necessary step to add them in, but again, if we already had them, if it was already changed and added to main learning results, we could just make that
Right.
change. If it wasn't, we could
I don't
make
think
that
it was
change
when those
first.
were approved. We have to look back at the policy that they approved. Instead of point over, not a big deal, but
Okay.
the state switched to them and they're assessing us on them, so.
Criteria for selection. A is the same. B is the same. C is the same. D is the same. E is the same. F is the same. Yep. G is the same. H is the same. I is the same. J is the same. And I think the only thing with J, I would just like it to say district, the school district versus the school committee. Just if we're gonna align committee and board, we should align district to unit. And then the other factors should be considered: accuracy, currency, material, that's the same. And then in evaluating software, multimedia, materials, online, internet resources, etc. That aligns with main school management sample policy. Comments on criteria for selection. Procedures for selection. Procedures for selection. You have meeting the needs of the individual schools based on the knowledge of the curriculum and the existing collections of instructional and library media materials are the highest priority. Basic learning, those are the most predominant instructional materials. By most members of the class, they're used most significant portion of the course and receive major emphasis. So that's, again, verbatim with main school management, sample policy. And then you have, obviously, the learning results take priority in the selection. Page 4 at the top, before recommending materials for purchase, professional staff should evaluate the existing collection. Consulting reputable, unbiased professional prepare selection aids and specialists from all departments and grade levels. So that's the same. You have your social studies and science textbooks should not be older than 5 years unless up-to-date supplemental instructional materials are also available. That's obviously something that we are very aware of and try to keep our selections up to date. Sometimes older, there's just a new revision by a textbooks company, and so the revision obviously a few things get added or changed, and then ultimately it's not more than 5 years old. So I know that's something that's obviously important. It's a significant amount of money to update textbooks for a course every 5 years. And so a lot of times, at least at the middle school, the practice was, getting half of the set and working out the older volumes, because a lot of times those revisions only change a page number, just enough to make it a new revision. So I think that's where you start getting into back at J under criteria for selection, the constraints of the school budget. Trying to make sure that we balance those purchasing, even if something is getting close to 5 years old.
Mr. Grant, should that be updated to, because we say it should not be older than 5 years, and we put ourselves in a situation where if we are 7 years out, but the social studies book hasn't had any major revisions, it could put us in a situation where we're expected to purchase new books even though it doesn't actually make sense instructionally. Should that be adjusted to be as up to date as necessary deemed for students, or?
I think that makes more sense because again, the difference between a brand new book and the one that you had 5 years ago might be the page numbers, right? There's just a slight change in revision. What do you think, Mr. Walsh? Especially
We're talking 20 grand a class right now,
Yep.
right? So, or a course.
Yep.
The second half of the statement also covers us in that.
Well, that's if they're supplemental, though. If they haven't done a supplement,
Yeah.
I see what Mr. Freeman is saying. We don't want to get in a position where we have to buy a physics book, which is $240, because it's year 6 and they haven't done another edition. That's an issue. Social studies less because they do the supplements come in regularly.
Right.
The science and the math, those are the big ones right now, over $200 a book. I think that language would do it.
Yeah, Debbie.
Does the line where it says no longer useful materials, does that respond to if there's a minor change like a page number or something? Would that encompass that? Because it says outdated and if we're looking at 5 years or older being outdated, but if it's no longer useful, to me that would be a major change in it. But if it's only a page number, it's the same book and it's only a page number, would that line allow us to keep using those books? That I don't know if that.
And what line are you referencing?
On page, in the MSMA one, if I look at page 4, where it said the last paragraph above donated materials, and the last line says out of date or no longer useful materials should be withdrawn from the collection or circulation. Would that line cover, because if the material in the book is still the same and it's still relevant, but the page number is changed, I don't know if that would.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. Is that like?
Would that encompass it so that you'd be able to keep a book that's 7 years old in circulation because it hadn't really changed? I don't know if that's enough wording to cover that. I don't know.
I think you probably all experienced this, and I did teaching. I would hand out the brand new book to a third of the kids, but then maybe a third got the 4-year-old books, and a third got the 10-year-old. You're right, you see all the names written on the inside of the cover, but there's fundamentally no difference, right, in the content. And so I think for me, it's kind of balancing that budget piece of like replacing a set over time and not having, to be bound by, we have to have a new set because this is 6 years old and it says 5 years, And so I think for me, I would like to see probably the date drop, or the number drop, and move into a more when needed or as needed. What do you all think about that?
Is it more important that we're reviewing them every 5 years? Yeah, recess. Maybe. So that they're not getting. So that we don't allow our curriculum to get, or our materials to get,
Yeah.
Is that what they're getting at?
Right.
I'm wondering.
Right.
I wonder why they specifically, I mean, you guys know, why do they single out social studies and science? Well, because those two content areas are the more frequently changing content areas. Math and reading, writing, they don't, the content itself doesn't change as frequently. Like with social studies and science, it's forever changing fairly rapidly at times.
And I think sometimes in those subjects in particular, the ordering of those books gets backburnered. If there are other things like math, ELA books, I feel like they tend to be more backburnered. Is that, I can only
Well,
speak.
the reality is with social studies, we're using those now as a class resource.
Right,
So
they're
we're not buying 500
Yeah.
social studies books.
Right.
We're buying a classroom set for each teacher, depending on what the subject is.
Yep.
And then they're using that more as a resource than the actual content of the course, which is how social studies should be. It's more supplementary material by all means.
Yeah.
Science is the one that's tricky because, I mean, those uphold science courses, those books are really expensive. And we don't see a whole lot of change in chemistry or physics. I'm kind of leaning Ms. Perry with what you said. Those textbooks, I think all textbooks should be reviewed in the 5-year window, and then a rotation set up for replacement as needed. Versus you can't have a 6-year-old physics book, or you can't have a 6-year-old geography book. The problem is we got to a point where we had books that were 20 years old, and countries no longer existed. And I mean, the history ones especially, so I get why they put it in there, but I think a review makes more sense than a replacement. At least I think that balances cost effectiveness and making sure we're up to date on the curriculum.
Yeah, so social studies and science textbooks should be reviewed and replaced as needed.
I think all textbooks should be
Right.
replaced every 5 years and then replaced as needed. I think that would satisfy, the intent behind that.
So all textbooks should be reviewed. And how did you word that, Kristen?
I said, Brian added, all textbooks should be reviewed and replaced as needed. Unless up-to-date supplemental instructional materials are available. I don't like the also.
No, I would put the 5 years in there too to make sure it's
And
out.
5 years.
Yeah,
Reviewed within and replaced.
right. So the replacement cycle we have now, we review, then replace as needed. That's what we should do, I think, from a fiscal standpoint.
How would you incorporate, you said staggering, are you talking about where you started before you start?
Where we currently are, we can, at least at the high school, we continue the same cycle. We're now, next year we're looking at the chemistry book, and we review that, we see what the new upgrade is, we see what the differences are. So we have a cycle that we're doing right now. I can't speak for K-8, where they are, and I know you just came on the job, so.
Most of our materials are consumables, so they get updated yearly. We don't purchase a lot of textbooks, so it doesn't quite apply to us.
And we're in the middle ground of the middle school.
And I think even with the science at the middle school, a lot of the textbooks are the supplementary material because of our relationship with the Rice Center at Maine. They provide so many kits and so many things that the kids are doing hands-on that a lot of times those books are simply that. They don't even go home with the students. They reference them for a particular lesson, a particular lab. They're not being handed out, write your name in them, read and answer questions. They are the supplementary material in a lot of cases. So social studies and science textbooks should be reviewed at 5 years or after 5 years, unless there's up-to-date supplemental and instructional material also available.
Mr. Grant, are we going to do social studies and science, or are we going to do all textbooks?
I think, probably to Brian's point, it probably should say all textbooks.
We're doing it now, so.
Right. We're doing it
But
this year.
what happens 5 years from now, or 3 years from now, or whenever? You want the policy for whoever's here, not the current.
Yeah.
I think that's best practice. And I think we should do best practice.
Yeah. All textbooks should be reviewed all textbooks should be reviewed after 5 years.
Do you want to put and replaced as needed
Replaced 5 years.
unless up to date?
As needed. Unless up-to-date supplemental instruction
Materials are available.
are available. All textbooks should be reviewed after 5 years and replaced as needed unless up-to-date supplemental instruction materials are available. Got it?
Yes.
Whenever possible, purchase of non-print materials and multimedia internet technology resources shall be made only after a personal evaluation by the library media specialist or other appropriate professional staff. Reviewing aids may be used in lieu of personal evaluation. So that's the same. And multiple copies of outstanding and much in-demand materials should be purchased as needed. Worn out or missing standard items should be replaced periodically. Out of date and or no longer useful materials should be withdrawn from the collection or circulation. Any comments there?
Seems a little redundant, but
And I think
That's
in
okay.
in our last, did we do disposal? Have we done our disposal policy yet?
I thought we
I
did.
think we
Right?
just did that one, right?
I was thinking maybe May or
Yeah.
June. Yeah.
Yeah.
That was disposable of disposal, that was a couple of disposal of equipment.
Oh, wait.
I think it was equipment, if I remember correctly. I'm not sure that it specified educational materials. I don't remember. I remember reviewing the policy, but I don't remember exactly if that was it or not.
Donated materials are still subject to evaluated same criteria, so ours aligns there. Parental authority, student's parent and guardian may inspect upon requesting instructional material as used as part of the curriculum. That's the same. The superintendent shall be responsible for developing and implementing procedures for providing access to instructional material within a reasonable time frame after the request is made. The board recognizes the final authority as to what the materials an individual student will be exposed. Requests from students, parents, or guardians, however, at no time will the wishes of one child's parents to restricting his or her reading or viewing of a particular item infringe upon parents' rights to permit their children to read or view the same material. That's all verbatim. Library Media Center materials will not be removed from collection because of criticism except in accordance with board policy, so that should say committee. So I think this is a good time to discuss one of the ideas that we had regarding parental authority.
That's why I have an asterisk right there.
Yep.
So after the last school board meeting, I took a look at some of the other forms we have in place, and I looked at the language I took right from policy. And this is, I think, where it falls in that second paragraph under parental authority.
Yeah.
So the first paragraph that's on there, that's straight from policy on the objective of library media resources. And I think I use the word resources because it's not just books, because we have books, we have periodicals, we have electronics, we have a bunch of different materials, which are resources. And then created a form similar to the form that we have for multimedia, sharing pictures, video, etc. of your student. This is also the form we use for student information that goes out to the armed services. So because we take federal funds every year, we get a request for juniors and seniors demographic information. So I took the 2 forms, and that's where I created this form from. So in essence, if a parent chooses to fill this form out, just like the other 2 forms we use, if a student tried to take something out from the library that was themed as adult, and right now I went on and I looked at we're using BroadArt, which is a third party. BroadArt is a third party vendor. So they go through and they categorize each book or resource, whether it's children, young adult. But if this form were in place, when a student went to take something out, if this form's there, they're on a spreadsheet, a database, and if it comes up, the parent would then be contacted based on the information they filled out here to decide if indeed that's something their child should take out or not take out. And I look at that because what it doesn't do, it doesn't prohibit another student, but it allows the parent, again, to have that authority over that item or that piece of material. I don't think we're ever going to agree on values with 6,000 people in the community, but I think you're putting something in place that allows a parent to do that with their own child makes sense. And given the technology we have, it's not like it would be difficult to do it. Kid comes up, boom, they're on there using the library program. Email goes out to parent or phone call, depending on which they choose. And they want the child to have it, they have it. If they don't, they don't. I think that would solve part of the issue that was raised last meeting. And I don't think it would be too difficult to put it, again, I'm talking high school. I don't know K, how that works. I don't know if it's in their collections. And I think it could be extended as well. I shared this with a parent, and they said, well, what about classroom libraries? I think that's probably more of a K-8 thing. If you walk in our 40 classrooms, there's not a whole lot of books on shelf, but we could use the same tool to do that if that were indeed an issue. I'm thinking more year level. That's about my kids were in local elementary school. The teacher always had tons of options. Here it's more resource room, and usually it's down the levels. It's down, not up. So, but that was my thinking on this. That gives the parent that authority to say no, and it gives them the opportunity to have a conversation with their student. What's the intent of this? What's the purpose of this? What do you research? I think a dialogue is not a bad thing.
So this is a hard copy form that would go home.
Right. This would be just we send
Just like our media.
we send the media release form. We send the military form. We send the No Child Left Behind. We do depending on this one goes home. Just like laptop code, just like the laptop form. It becomes one of those. And if I choose to fill this out and if it's young adult, if it's Harry Potter, which is rated 8 to 12, again, that shouldn't be an issue. But as soon as you hit that adult, that's where that gray becomes wider, at least at the high school level. And I think this would solve that issue. I think it would. Who knows? It may cause bigger issues. I don't know. But at least I, as a parent, if I fill this out, I'm aware of what they're wanting to look at. And so I have not run this, obviously, by the librarian or, I just haven't vetted the thing yet, but I figured this is a place to do it.
It's a great idea.
What is the applicability of this at a K-8 level?
I was just kind of thinking about that. We don't really have any mature content, nor should we at the elementary level. I could see this, I don't know, I would have to look at the system itself and see if there are any, and talk to my parents about whether or not there are any particular flags that they would like to see that we could put on books. If there was something that they didn't want their child reading as a subject area or content. So we could certainly look into it.
But we'd also have to figure out, again, we use BroadArt, can you add to the third party, right? So if there's a resource that's not in there, it should be in there, but if it's not, can you add it?
Right.
And then if you see something coming up, well.
The one thing that I can see is we do interlibrary loan, and so I can't imagine my librarian putting a mature book into the hands of one of my elementary school students, but having a flag for that just in case could also be helpful.
Well, for us, it also solves, students here can get a Bangor Public card. So if you're a student here, just like every high school, then you can get a card. But they still have to take it out through us. This would solve what if they want to take out whatever from the Bangor Public Library, well, comes back like that, goes to the parent decides.
And our kids have access to that too, so I can
Yeah.
see that being, you
I
know,
just, when you said that was, I didn't think of interlibrary, but
that
I
would be
think
my
that
biggest
was all that
concern
too.
because I know that Colleen looks at every book that goes home. But it's that interlibrary loan piece that gets a little bit tricky, especially where we go through Bangor Public too.
Yeah.
Just from, again, logistical question. So if I'm a kid, my parents filled out the form, I take out a book that triggers the adult theme. It pops up, it gets scanned, right?
That's the librarian or the library tech. Again, depending on, I put email and phone on here, whatever. I mean, we live in a texting world, or whatever, whichever they choose. Boom, it goes off, and it doesn't go out with that kid until there's a response.
So there.
So it's not after the fact.
It's not after
It's
the fact.
it's preventative. It's preemptive. It's and again, as far as I'm concerned, that then can be a conversation with the parent and the students. Right. So
This is parental, we're talking about parental
yeah.
authority.
Well, that's what it fell under. So that's right. That made more sense.
I think you're right, because it allows the parent, the guardian, the grandparent, whoever it is, right, to have that conversation about why do you need this book, why do you want to read
Well,
this
again,
book?
I go to the laptop, right? We've got about 20 kids at the high school whose parents say, or guardians say no. So they say you're not taking it. It's, you know, I see this, again, it struck me, there's a way to do this. And I do think, again, I don't think we don't have a whole lot of teacher libraries up here. Again, I think it would be more a problem for you guys, but we could put those books through and use the same thing, where it's got to go through the form and the process.
And again, logistically fairly.
Well, again, because of technology, you have the database, you have the two databases, and the library aide just gets used to when a kid takes a book out, you check. And if it is, boom, message goes out. You get the reserve card, it can sit there until, and I think that would solve it. I think it would.
And this can do,
We want to bounce it off some people, make sure it would work.
this can do print materials too. It's not.
Well, I think we do it for anything that's in the library, anything that we check out in the library.
So that's my question. It can do it for everything. It's not just.
Yeah, we've got DVD, I mean, you name it, we've got it in the library, so that would, anything bar tagged, it would solve the issue. It doesn't replace the multimedia one, it doesn't replace the computer one, those need to be on their own.
Yeah, no, we have to have our own, right?
But I see it as, okay, this is,
I think it's a great idea.
and then, because there is a difference between a 9th grader and a 12th grader, let's be honest. I mean, there's a huge difference. So my 17er, and this doesn't, the one thing we could not use this for, when kids take college classes here, so when they take English 101, 102 to the University of Maine, we can't prohibit what's in that.
Right.
That's a choice to take the course or not take the course. That's where this would not work.
Right.
But we don't use it for that, we use it for our material.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. I think it's a great idea, Brian.
It's great till we try it and see what happens.
Well, it gives you the opportunity to, A, see how many people send the form back, right? And then you start working on finite,
Well, there's gonna be something in place if we have a book that's not, Arts does, I threw like 12 titles in of stuff that, more nonfiction, but I put stuff in, it gives you it says it right on the program what they rated. And that they're talking about level in content,
So this is something you feel comfortable sending out?
once it's vetted and once it's approved, absolutely, yeah. But again, my head went right to that. We do it for multimedia, we do it for computers, we do it for information. I don't know why we couldn't do that. And we keep databases on all the other ones, so.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea. Okay. Any other thoughts? Challenge materials. Let's see here. So, in the sample policy, we are the verbatim teacher use. I'm just looking. We obviously have board again, so we need to change that to the committee. And then, in the event event that a complaint is made, the following procedures apply. So we have the first step is a complaint shall be heard first by the person providing materials in question. Second step, B, if the complaint is not resolved, the complainant shall be referred to the building principal and requested the instructional library media challenge form. Copies forwarded to the superintendent. C, superintendent shall appoint a committee composed of the following persons to review: one principal at the appropriate grade level, one librarian/media specialist, one classroom teacher, the department head in the subject area of the challenge materials, and one community member. Any questions about that one or comments on that appointment of a committee? Okay. Review committee shall read and examine the materials referred to, check general acceptance of materials, reading reviews, weighing values, faults against each other, form opinions based on the material as a whole, not in passages or portions pulled out of context, meet to discuss the material and to prepare a report. That's verbatim. E, the report of the committee shall be forwarded to the superintendent and will inform the complainant. F, no material shall be removed from use until review committee has made final decision. And then you obviously have your G, review committee's decision may be appealed to the committee. And then the school committee may set aside a portion of the regular meeting or call a special meeting for the purpose of receiving testimony from representatives on various points of view. The material shall be reviewed objectively in its full content. 2, evaluated in terms of needs, interests of students, school, curriculum, and community. It's the same, considered in the light of differing opinions, and 4, reviewed in the light of criteria for initial selection as purposes for audit. So all of those are the same to the main school management, the board, so that should be committee again. Will announce its decision in writing note later than the conclusion of the next regular board committee. Revolves. And when you look at your legal references, those are all the same, and the cross-reference of the instructional form. Any comments on the challenge?
Sorry.
Go for it.
So because of those legal references on the back,
Yeah.
you get the feds, you get the state,
Yeah.
right, and you get Nickel on there. You have to, I would put this form to the attorney at main school management. Because what I don't want to do is find out we're using it and then they're saying you're in violation of the federal whatever act, and now we're, on that.
Sure.
But I think that's a simple review because I don't know the main department that I'm not worried about that MSRA, but with Nickelby, I just don't know what they're, when it comes to that freedom of information stuff, I just, it would be smart to just run it through them.
Yeah, check the deal on that.
Yeah.
Well, that was going to be my question too, and I guess if you talk to them, can we just make it a school procedure versus part of?
I love procedure. I would prefer that we can start using it.
Right.
But we also take federal funds and state
Right.
funds, so that's why those references are on there. We're going to comply with them. So I just, if they say procedural, great. But
I can check with main school management to make sure that that's still up to date.
Okay.
They sent me this policy when I asked for the sample a week or two ago, whenever we,
Decided.
August 3rd, I think, or something like that. So, but I will certainly check.
yeah, just make sure my form doesn't violate.
Yeah.
Okay, sure.
Because I just know that sending things like this home all at the same time is more helpful for getting things back than waiting a long
And
time.
they might also have a form too.
Yeah, they have one even better.
They might have a
There's
form.
will have gone for legal, so.
Right, because they obviously have the instructional challenge form.
Right.
So I'll check your form to that federal statute. All right. Well, 9 minutes to look at KLGA. Relations with school resource officers and law enforcement authorities. We do not have a KLGA. That's why you don't have our own policy. Obviously, in our attempt to secure a resource officer, this was something that we felt like we should obviously look at. Maine new law effective October 18th, 2021 requires school resource officers complete diversity, equity, and inclusion training or implicit bias training at least once during the officer's first year of employment as a school resource officer. The law does not specify who is responsible for providing this training, so that gets a little sticky because I talked to the sheriff about that. So who actually provides the training at our academy? Do they go to a national school resource conference? So that would be something that we would want to make sure that they are in compliance with that training. Local school units should discuss this with law enforcement, which we did, providing the school resource officer including information about which entity will provide the required training in their SRO program agreement / memorandum of understanding. And so that's certainly something that we will put in the memorandum and or the contract with Penobscot County is when that training actually will take place and who will do the training. So that's the first part.
So, Mr. Mayor, because we just bought that training suite, and I'm sure that specifically is in there, if in our agreement with them, we could write right into that agreement, the training will take place in August, or with the same with all the faculty and staff. I mean, they're going to be on staff.
Yep.
We already own it.
Yep.
And I know that I saw that something similar to that in there. So that would be probably be nice if they did it with us too. So they're getting the same information, training the same way on that piece.
Obviously, Maine has limited opportunities for this, just because of the size and population of our state. There are not a lot of SRO officers, and there's just not a lot of training for them. So, I would think we would also like to see any opportunities for them to do their regional training with other SRO officers and statewide training as well. But we certainly have that suite that would probably. Well, I'll look into it, Brian. That's okay. That's a good thought.
Thank you.
Vector. All right. So obviously we don't have anything to compare it to, but we obviously have school boards. We want to change all those to school committees. And then you have your opening statement there about just again that cooperative relationship, maintaining a safe work environment or school environment. Excuse me. We would be contracted with Penobscot County, so we would want to change to Sheriff's Department versus police. So anytime we saw police, we'd have to change some of that language. So anywhere you see police, we would have Sheriff's Department. Just make a note of that. And then it gives you kind of that really key phrase that the purpose of the SRO is to enforce local, state, and federal laws and to assist in maintaining physical security and safety of the school department. And I think that's ultimately what we want that officer for. Because I think sometimes it's the tragedies get brought up, but there's a lot of other local and state and certainly federal laws that we aren't concerned about. And so I like that purpose statement is right there, obviously embedded. In keeping with blank, right, Hermon School Department's mission, so that would work. The primary role of the SRO is to, and then you have their primary roles, provide support, enforce local, state, serve as a resource to administrators and teachers. That is something that I would definitely consider amending when I was reviewing this. I don't know if I would include teachers in this, because what I want to be very careful, and this is the conversation that I had with the sheriff, I want all relationship build, if you will, to go through the building administrators. And what I mean by that is I don't want a teacher grabbing the officer and saying, hey, will you come into my class? Hey, will you talk to so-and-so? I want to make sure that we have a very clear structure for how the SRO responds to requests. And that ought to be a chain of command of certain building administrators and then ultimately up to me, depending on, again, what the requests are in the different buildings and what the needs are in the different buildings. Does that make sense? Brian, what do you think?
Well, we have the therapist here.
Yep.
In Northern Light, and we put those protocols in place.
Yep.
So that again, you do it the proper way, so the proper people see the screen, and I think the SRO would be similar. Unless in obviously an emergency situation, that would be different altogether, but I think that makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
I envision that person working closely with our wellness team, so we communicate really well.
So for me right now, serving as a resource to administrators in planning and providing age-appropriate educational programs, because I think at the first year in particular, it's going to start at the administrative level, talking about whole group training, department training, but going into the classroom to work with an individual teacher, I just don't think that we're going to be there yet in our first year with this person. And especially where we're looking at one officer for all 3 campuses. Again, I just want to make sure that when we talk about job description, that the department, they want us to be very realistic in what they are capable of doing. And so I do not want to stretch them too thin and feeling the pressure to go and do classroom lesson, implement the DARE program, right, in 5th grade, or, something like that. I want to make sure that is funneled through the administrators first.
I do hope that we leave a little bit of room at the K-4 level for, there's some fear around law enforcement, and we noticed that when we had some troopers come in and I was showing them some safety measures, and that shouldn't be. So I really want to work with the SRO in helping kids know that policemen are there to help you. They're there to support you, and they can be a good resource for you. So if we can figure out some ways, and maybe it's just having presence in the building, I don't know, but I do think at our level that's going to be the top priority, is looking at that person as someone who can help them.
And I would love it if you were the one that solicited your teachers, and then you're the one that structures that, right, sets that up with the officer. Grade 2 is going to do this, and grade 1 is going to do this, and this is so-and-so's class is going to do this, versus the individual teachers reaching out and saying, hey, will you come into my room and we're talking about fill in the blank, And we might get there at some point, but I want to make sure that it is very clear, structured in that first year, so that this is a successful relationship.
I think you're absolutely right. Having worked in a school district, in school with an SRO, there is realistic and unrealistic expectations of a single individual. That job is a very hard job to be an SRO. Building the relationships with all 1,000 people, 1,500 people in the district is not easy. And the reality is that knowing how the high school works, there's only so much time that individual will have for the elementary and middle school. So building that understanding that's through a single point person at both the elementary, middle, and high school is a good thing.
Mike, can I just ask one question, because I'm not real familiar with this? How does having an officer in the building, do you contracting with the sheriff's department to put somebody in the district in the district? But is it the same individual? Do you contract with one person so that the students have the opportunity to be consistently familiar with this person? Do they have the availability to be able to do that? I mean, that's kind of a multi-question.
Yeah, so we are contracting with the sheriff's department at Penobscot, obviously, county, for one person.
Okay.
So it would not be like we have a contract and whoever's on duty that day, one of 3, 4, 5 individual. It's one person. And so they would actually go out, post the position, and then hire that, whether that's an internal candidate or an external candidate, and then backfill if they needed to. But it would be Hermon School District SRO, and it would be one person. And certainly, they told us that if there's a major football game and we need 2 officers, or it's prom and we want another, just fill in the blank, right? They would provide additional officers, or if that person was out, they could provide a temporary replacement for a day or for an event. But we think the critical component in being successful in this he's the right person who knows how to work with kids. And has, whether it's training and experience, right, fill in the blank, but it is going to be one person.
Thank you.
Yeah. Serve as a resource to administrators and staff concerning law enforcement. I do think that part is okay, just because I think there could be an opportunity where a staff member is brought into a situation and that officer would be working with that. You know, if it was breaking up a fight or the staff person witnessed something, and so the officer is working with the staff member, right? It's not just the administrators. So I think that and frankly, that when you start talking about child welfare issues, there's also going to be situations where teachers and other staff, support staff, are potentially making, mandated reporter, reports of abuse, reports of neglect, and so the officer would be able to work with them directly in those situations. Assist students and their families in addressing issues related to law enforcement and helping students to have a meaningful school experience. That's really, to me, that's kind of a very Pollyanna statement, but that would obviously be the goal, is to have a meaningful school experience. And I don't know exactly if a student would look back and say, my meaningful school experience was as a result of my SRO. I don't know if that.
I have some students that said that.
Okay, that's great.
They created a law enforcement club, and
Oh,
the SRO actually ran the law enforcement club after school,
Yep.
teaching students all of what to know about law enforcement.
Yep.
And that club had like 35 kids in it. So if you get the right person,
Yep.
that's the key.
That's the key, right?
Yep.
It's like any position, right? It's all about the right person.
Mr. Gray, can you get us, I don't know, for the next meeting, can we get a copy of Bangor's Old Towns, Orono's, Hamden's, Brewers? I'm just saying the schools around with SROs, Nokomis. It'd be nice just to see what they have. And maybe we look at schools with just a single officer. Maybe that's the best way to do it.
Yeah, Bangor has rotating right
Yeah.
now.
Let's see. I know you can send out to your network who has a single person, or I think that may be the best way to do it.
I think that's going to be really helpful when we get into the -R,
Right.
that administrative procedure with law enforcement, and how they go about working with the officer directly on issues.
Correct.
Yeah, I can reach out to some of those districts that have a lot. The challenging thing is going to be most of those districts work with their police departments, and we're working with the county. So I think we could have.
How long the Nokomis?
Don't know.
That might be the one to reach out to.
We can still get the policies. But if
Obviously, they're going to be different without.
Right, they're going to be different.
Agreed.
When I worked with the police department in Milo at my time there, it was a rotating, right? We always had somebody on rotation stopping through it. And it changes how, it changes the interactions. And even the way they respond to certain things, it changes, so. School administrators and staff have the primary responsibility for maintaining proper order in the schools, for disciplining students for violation of committee policies and school rules. How the superintendent administrators may seek assistance from an SRO when they believe there is a threat to the welfare and safety of schools or students. The superintendent administrators also inform the SRO from the police department when they have a reason to suspect that a student or staff member has violated state or criminal law. And that is a practice that we obviously still do. It's just we call the sheriff's department, not call the SRO in our building or in our district. In general, the school committee discourages SRO and law enforcement authorities from using the school as a venue to arrest or question students for activities not related to or affecting schools. So that would be like maybe somebody was suspected of shoplifting. The business owner calls us. We would not allow school time to be used for the questioning of an activity that occurred outside, right? Like that would not be something that would allow it. We would discourage that. Under this policy, SROs are considered to be school officials with legitimate educational interests. The reviewing educational records in order to perform their professional responsibilities. So that would be, you would be employing this as a contracted service. So I think that's the one fundamental change. When we meet with an officer, there's limited, right, information that's shared from a FERPA standpoint. However, an SRO would be a school employee, and that would change a little, that would change some of that, right? They would have access to that information. So, and then obviously the last part, the school board, thanks, Ron. Yep. The school committee authorizes the superintendent to develop administrative procedures in consultation with that. And so we'll come back and we'll look at this administrative procedure. I don't think I'll do it for September. I think we'll look at it a little bit later when we get closer to the hiring process, as that draws near. But that would be part of this. And then there would probably be some additional protocols that we would try to follow and try to put in place depending on what Bangor and Brewer and some of our neighbors had and found to be successful or not successful. So, any questions about the KLGA?
Just a comment, and I don't know if I haven't read every line, but just making sure that somewhere on here that they'll serve as a liaison on our emergency planning documentation, so that they develop and support implementing the emergency plans across all Hermon schools, because generally they're one of the most knowledgeable in making sure that happens.
There is a local police contact on there, so it might just be an addition to whomever we have as that contact adding.
Where's that?
In the emergency management plans, there are, you list liaisons that you're working with, and
plan
so.
itself. Yeah, we can change that to our SRO and, And that would be something too, Zach. I'm looking briefly at this, our emergency plan.
And that's just why I brought it up, just to make sure that it's on the thought next time.
I think that would fall under this -R, general expectations, roles of school personnel and SROs. I think that would be where we would make sure we had something about our emergency plan and the execution of that plan wherever they would need to be an integral part of that. Just make a note for next time. Any questions? Let's go to Chris and Debbie. I kind of do this a little more on your schedule. You know, like down the road, any idea what's on your calendar? You want me to read you some dates?
I think Mondays work for me scheduling. I don't know if when school getting ready to start, so I don't know.
It might have to be, depending on the day, it might have to be a little later than 2:30 for me. Now that school's starting again.
So are you looking at September?
Yep. So you've got the 19th is the Monday after the school committee meeting, and then the 26th. So those are the 2 Mondays following in September, 19th and 26th.
I could do the 19th, or then I don't know if you can.
Yeah, I can. If
Does that
we,
work?
can we do like 3:30?
Sure.
I'm sorry, did you say 3:30?
Yeah.
That work for you, Debbie?
Will you expect administration to attend?
So looking at the 19th, a lot of it is just a policy. When I look at the following policies that I would like to review next month, I would say no. And I would like to review
That's my point of order question.
there's no point of order.
Did you guys go over DEH?
So you can ignore him.
Who's the chair?
We are going to meet on the 19th.
Kristen, are you the chair of this meeting?
All right, so this meeting's over. I hope you all have a good afternoon.
The last, what, the ninth previous teacher, Tommy Coach, resigned, is that correct? Anyone know, have any information, comment to the public on that, or?
She's not my staff, I'm sorry.
Not my staff.
Don't know.
Thank you, Debbie. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Freeman. Have a good afternoon. Thanks, Debbie.
Oh, yeah. I just,
It's, like it doesn't understand.
we'll be ready
So the goal is what they do is the chair of the school actually creates a school policy and then that actual policy, which that's what after Hermon is will follow. The chair then actually goes to the meetings, not the superintendent, thinks that they're in charge, and they're